Good morning and welcome to Tuesday's Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, the podcast that gives you everything about the day ahead in British politics in under 20 minutes. And today, we're coming to you from a football stadium, hosting a climate change summit sandwiched between two oil lakes in Azerbaijan. I mean, where else would I be?
Well, I'm very happy to say that I am in southeast London and not planning to leave it anytime soon. My name's Jack Blanchard on Politico. With me, as you can hear, down the line is Sam Coates of Sky News. It is Tuesday, the 12th of November, and the Prime Minister and Sam have both flown almost 3,000 miles to Baku for the COP UN Climate Change Summit. He's got a big announcement to make this morning, lots of climate news to talk about, but honestly, the spectre of Donald Trump is going to be following him everywhere he goes. Sam, you're there with him. What on earth is it like over there?
I mean, I really am in one of the oddest places I've ever reported from. It's a little piece of UN convention lands, specially built inside a vast football stadium on the outskirts of Baku. Now, that might be quite hard for listeners to place. Just for a bit of comparison, people from Wales football fans might recall this as the place that they drew 1-1 with Switzerland at the Euros in 2020, when 8,000 Welsh fans travelled here. So it's not the first time Brits have ever descended, but I'm not sure that many others have come here. But right now, and all this week, it's the temporary home to 190 plus government delegations to try and thrash out whether or not we're basically having a party to wave goodbye to the climate change movement, given the return of Donald Trump to the White House, or whether that there is a lot worth fighting for still. And it's in that context Keir Starmer is making his big announcement. And I'm not wrong. One of my colleagues identified the two oil fields on the either side of this football stadium. And 25 minutes away, because this is an oil-rich nation, there is a hill that has been on fire, according to local legend, for 4,000 years, burning away like a cheap imitation sitting room fire. Such is this place a testament to the very fossil fuels that this summit is trying to consign to history.
Starmer's got various meetings there this morning, we know, Sam, and that the main event for us watching back in the UK will be a press conference that we were expecting around 11 a.m. UK time. Do you want to just talk us through the stuff he's actually announcing there today before we get on to what he might get asked about in the press conference, and inevitably the answer to which will be Donald Trump?
So just at the point where Donald Trump is talking about oil being gold, other EU nations are going just a little bit wobbly and looking at maybe even buying US gas in order to appease Donald Trump. Keir Starmer is running very hard in the other direction today, and he's got an announcement, and I hate to say it's one of those slightly techie announcements, because a lot of climate change science and policy is quite techie, and it's aimed squarely at the people here in Baku who are attending this summit, but it matters and it's going to have real world implications. Right, so the announcement is a new commitment. Keir Starmer will say at the press conference, I think it is still around about 11 a.m. UK time, that he wants to cut emissions by 81% by 2035. In other words, that's emissions would be 81% less compared to 1990 levels by that date. Now, I'm sure listeners will not necessarily, be able to sort of place how significant that is. So let me just quickly explain it. That is a more ambitious goal than the previous UK government, the Conservative governments had set. The previous target under Rishi Sunak and other Tory prime ministers was for 67% by 2030. Now, obviously, the target date is just that little bit further away, but the level of ambition is a lot higher. And what that means is pretty much the UK is now going to be first amongst equals, more or less, in terms of really ambitious climate change goals. It means that the UK is going to have to do more in terms of looking at ways of reducing emissions, and that isn't going to be spelled out in a great deal of detail today, whether it's more on electric cars or more on, less meat eating or whatever. Keir Starmer's just given a Pool interview saying he doesn't want to tell people what to do to try and reduce these emissions, but inevitably it is going to mean changing the way that we live our lives. I bumped, because this is a weird big convention centre with lots of journalists and delegates wandering around, I just bumped into Sky's science and technology editor and wanted to gauge his view on the significance of this. And listen to this, it's Tom Clark, and listen to the excitement in his voice, to be frank.
So this is really quite an impressive target that the UK is coming to this summit with. An 81% cut in carbon emissions puts them right up there amongst the most ambitious countries in the world in terms of trying to reduce their emissions, show that they can grow their economies and go towards net zero. It sends a really powerful signal to other nations. Okay, it's going to go down very, very well at a climate summit like this, where it's all about raising that ambition. It puts the UK right back in the kind of leadership position that it felt it had for so long until Rishi Sunak's government decided to sort of try and row back a little bit and settle down. So
that's Tom Clark, Sky's science and technology editor, enthusing about the importance of this. But Jack, the context is inescapable. Other domestic electorates haven't been sold on the climate change agenda, and Donald Trump has returned. So it is quite a bold move for the British Prime Minister to be running in the opposite direction.
I think it's really interesting that it's easy for Keir Starmer to talk in these abstracts, and as you say, announcing a shift from a 78% target to an 81% target is so abstract, it's not really going to mean very much to people today when they hear him say that at the press conference. But if you look behind it, the Climate Change Committee, which advises the government on its climate targets, it's been saying that we need to get to this point for years. It did a carbon budget report 4 years ago that talked about getting to this point. By now we'll be making this target, but it says very clearly that some of those emission cuts may need to come from, quote, an accelerated shift in diets away from meat and dairy products, and also the phase out of gas boiler sales. Now, Keir Starmer is definitely not announcing that we can't eat meat today, but that is the implication of some of these sorts of things, along with gas boilers. And as you say, we've seen in other countries how when governments have tried to push electorate in these sorts of directions, very, very bad things have happened to those governments very quickly. Just look at the German government, where Olaf Scholz made a complete mess of boiler policy with all the best intentions, trying to bring in what he considered to be superior, cleaner boilers for the German nation. And Olaf Scholz's government is completely collapsing right now. He's lost all popularity and he is going to be out. And that's before you get onto the idea of government suggesting that people ought to eat less meat. Now, there may be lots of people listening to this that thinking we should all eat less meat, and that's a really good idea. But the politics of it, especially in the current climate, is toxic. And it was interesting to see Keir Starmer being asked about this yesterday and instantly running a million miles away from any suggestion that the UK government is, quote, telling people what to do. He is very much not giving that message. But that is the implication behind some of these targets, and that is the sort of thing that, shall we say, populist right-wing leaders, shall we say people like, Nigel Farage and maybe Kemi Badenoch too, will be looking to pounce on to try and make political capital out of what the UK government is actually trying to do here, which is a massive shift, as you say, in the way we live our lives.
I just have to interject and say Azerbaijan's two big specialities are oil and meat, particularly chicken and beef, and that is something I can now testify to firsthand, having been here less than 24 hours.
I did promise I'd ask you what they have for breakfast in Azerbaijan, and I did instantly get a text message from someone saying, yes, that's what I want to know too. Can you now reveal, Sam Coates, what they have for breakfast in Azerbaijan?
No, because I ate so much at dinner that there was no need for it, but it was meat, and okay. Meat all the way. Back to the politics before we slide off topic too much. Honestly, Jack, there has been a really big switch in another way in the politics of how Number 10 has suddenly started talking about this stuff. And I was really struck by this on the plane out when we were talking to Keir Starmer. We were asking about climate change policy in the face of Donald Trump's denialism and calling it just in the last few days a hoax. And he started justifying this because he said he had two priorities that he needed to ram home on the global stage for the benefit of people at home. Two priorities, not 5 missions, not 6 first steps. We now have 2 priorities. The first one is helping the economy, boosting growth, and the second one is protecting our borders. All of a sudden, Keir Starmer has 2 priorities that align with pretty much with what Donald Trump was making an argument to the electorate about just a week or two ago. And it feels like he has nuanced and changed his language around this stuff. So if you listen to Keir Starmer's argument this morning, he's not talking about the slightly more abstract announcement about 81% of emissions being reduced. He's actually saying the big thing he wants to talk about and the big thing that he wants people to hear about is an announcement of a £1 billion contract for wind turbines that are going to be made in Hull. That's the bit that he announced on the Pool interview that he's hoping broadcasters will use later today. So he knows that this stuff is tricky domestically, and it's interesting, he is still continuing with the policies, but suddenly the messaging has kind of changed lanes, and you can kind of spy the hand of Morgan McSweeney, the new chief of staff, behind it, and become a lot less abstract. And when this government talks about climate change, it tries to talk about it in terms that it hopes will impress voters rather than abstract concepts to be delivered in years to come. 2 priorities. That's a big switch.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that if you were looking across the pond at the American election, it was pretty clear that the American voters had 2 priorities, and they were indeed the economy and border security, and that is why Donald Trump won big and Kamala Harris did not. And you can see governments around the world scrambling to react to that if it wasn't obvious enough before, it's very, very obvious now what happens to you as a government if you don't focus laser-like on those 2 priorities above all else. And maybe that 2 priorities thing is we're going to hear more and more from Labour over the next few months and years. So to talk a little bit more about Donald Trump and the US dynamic to this, Sam, as you say, Donald Trump hanging over this conference like a big orange toxic cloud, having said climate change is a hoax very, very recently indeed. He's currently actually sat in real life, he's sat in Florida making picks for his new cabinet, and these people are the people that are going to dominate our lives coming out of Trump world over the next few years ahead. And there's some important names that are coming out overnight that are going to make a big difference here in the UK. Biggest among them, although he's famously not actually that very big himself, Marco Rubio appears to be Trump's pick for US Secretary of State, essentially the American Foreign Secretary. We're going to expect to see a lot of Marco Rubio, the Florida senator, over here in the next few years. He, of course, was Trump's leadership rival in 2016. Trump used to mock him mercilessly as Little Marco. Well, all of that is now behind because Rubio has fallen completely in line with Trump's way of thinking, as people tend to do in Republican politics. It's important for Britain and Europe because he very much mirrors Trump's stance on Ukraine. Marco Rubio said last week that what America is financing here is a stalemate and it needs to be brought to an end. Those are the words of the person we're expecting to be the US Secretary of State in January. That's a pretty big deal. And in the climate context, Sam, he's also picked his guy to lead the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, someone called Lee Zeldin, who is all about deregulation on climate, who supports fracking and does not support the Paris Climate Agreement. So again, very much a signal of Trump's intentions when he comes to power in January. And I'm sure that people over there in Baku are scrambling to Google Lee Zeldin today to figure out what Trump's got in store for them.
I've been watching Keir Starmer over the last 36 hours, 24 hours, about how he deals with the many, many questions about Donald Trump. And we'll see this at the press conference at 11, I've got no doubt. And the whole Trump question poses a lot of difficulty for Western leaders as a whole. Because on the one hand, they clearly hugely disagree with the kinds of things that Trump's saying. So in the Paul interview just now, Keir Starmer was asked about Donald Trump's comments about climate change being a hoax, and he just sidesteps it. He doesn't want to make the argument back. He doesn't want to unpick a Donald Trump argument in public, even though he vehemently disagrees and is trying to basically thread a needle where he doesn't attract the attention of the US incoming US president by saying anything that he regards, Donald Trump regards as too inflammatory. So we're in this weird world, whether it was on climate change, whether bluntly it was on Ukraine, where all of a sudden Western leaders are muted in the way that they're making arguments about stuff that they believe in, and because of the fear of retaliation from the White House. So arguments are suddenly not being able to be had by leaders in public because of that fear of bluntly, of the Donald Trump Twitter account, X account, and that kind of ferocious blowback that you get if he notices what he perceives to be criticism.
One more important appointment, as we've been saying for the last few days, Sam, is going to be Britain's ambassador to Washington. We're still waiting for news on that. Really interesting story in the FT this morning, courtesy of our lobby colleague Lucy Fisher, that David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, is backing Peter Mandelson to become the next UK ambassador to the US. And she has him down now as Mandelson very much as the front runner for this job. That was broadly the reporting in the Sunday Times. On Sunday, the FT is saying it as well. FT reporting that a decision is likely to be made by next month. Well, that sounds like pretty imminent because it's the 12th of November right now. If that's right, I mean, Lammy obviously a powerful voice in this conversation, although not the only one. I mean, him and Mandelson go way back to the New Labour years. Mandelson, of course, also goes way back with Pat McFadden, the very important Cabinet Office Minister. Mandelson goes way back with Morgan McSweeney, the very important Chief of Staff. So Mandelson is well positioned in terms of the personnel here and is certainly doing a good job of talking himself into it. Now, I don't have any reporting to say this is right, but if we're expecting an announcement in the next couple of weeks, suddenly we have a very, very interesting figure potentially entering the fray, Sam.
I have one piece of intel. I picked it up a few weeks ago, and it was just somebody around Keir Starmer mentioned in passing that the one person who wasn't 100% sold on Peter Mandelson generally, and not in the context of this ambassador job, but was just getting a little bit annoyed with him, was Keir Starmer himself. And just the way that he made public pronouncements about the way Labour was conducting the campaign in opposition just rankled a little bit. So it may well be that we end up with a new ambassador in Washington that pleases everybody apart from the person right at the centre. But we will see when that announcement is made. And here's your reminder that there are a hell of a lot of big jobs that need to be filled, not least Cabinet Secretary. An announcement on that, frankly, must be coming pretty much imminently in the next fortnight, if even that long.
While we're on domestic news, Sam, there's one very important bit of domestic news coming through from the UK, which is that the Labour MP Kim Ledbetter unveiled her proposed assisted dying bill last night. This is potentially going to be one of the most seismic changes in British law we've seen in a long time, if it goes through. The bill was published last night. The vote in the House of Commons, of course, not happening until the end of November, but we have now seen the details of what she is proposing. The bill will allow terminally ill adults with less than 6 months to live to decide to choose to end their life. The vote in the House of Commons will not be whipped, as we know. Every MP will get a free vote, and we're starting to get filtering through from some of the big hitters and how they're going to vote in that. But I feel like the sort of general assumption is that the MPs are going to back it, but we honestly don't really know. Do you think that sounds about right, Sam?
I think so. There is a lot of nervousness, particularly amongst newer Labour MPs who just are a bit uncomfortable about quite being asked to jump so soon in this Parliament on something so totemic with so little time to go through the sort of and to concentrate on the details of it. One detail from the bill stands out, and that's the one that the Telegraph has picked up on its front page, which is that the terminally ill could end their lives 21 days after starting assisted dying, the assisted dying process. I just wonder whether that becomes something that is the focus of a little bit of pressure, but it does feel like there's been a seismic change in Parliament from the last time that this was debated in favour of this, even if the Health Secretary and the Justice Secretary, the two cabinet ministers that have to implement this legislation, are against it.
You can imagine there being a lot of debate over the precise details of how this would work, because I think some MPs will have different types of concerns and want different types of assurances, and it might be that if various concessions and amendments are made, then they can find a way of getting the bill over the line. Under the proposed legislation, patients would need the approval of 2 independent doctors and also a High Court judge to confirm they're eligible for assisted dying. So 3 different important figures approving it, and as you say, you'd need 7 days between the doctors making the assessments and then a further 14 days after the judge has made a ruling, so 21 days in total. As you say, you could see the debate centering around a lot of those details, and if they can get enough MPs on side who are comfortable with it, then the bill, I think, is going to go through.
There is a procedural quirk that because it's being debated on a Friday, they have to get enough MPs as a whole into the Commons chamber on that Friday to get it through. So just the mechanics of how it works, I think, will be quite interesting. Tiny bit of decoding. We asked, one of my colleagues asked the Prime Minister on the plane yesterday what he made of the assisted dying debate now. He has previously been in favour, quite strongly in favour of this. He said we won't be putting any pressure on Labour MPs to make up. It's genuinely going to be a free vote. They will make up their own mind, as I will be. Obviously, a lot will depend on the detail, and we need to get the balance right, but I've argued that there needs to be proper safeguards in place. There's the alarm. Just to be clear, I think Keir Starmer, my understanding from people around him is Keir Starmer remains in favour. You can't wholeheartedly back a piece of legislation that's not been published, and it hadn't been published at the time of chatting to him. It has now been. I would still expect him to back it.
All right, we better leave it there, Sam, because our 20 minutes are up. I hope you have a wonderful day in Baku. Enjoyed the meets and the press conference.
And the meat sweats that follow.
And the meat sweats. And I will see you back in London, I hope, tomorrow morning.
See you there.
Take care, bye-bye.